here that you will have 45 minutes for the presentation, and then we'll have 15 minutes questions, and that will be the end of the formal meeting. But then people who can stay are invited to stay for another 15 minutes for less formal conversation. So Zacharias, but please help us with the pronunciation of your name.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you well.
Thank you so much for the invitation. This is, the pronunciation is Zacharias Maniadis. I think you did an excellent job, Ido. So once more, a pleasure to be here. I want to make a little bit of a small correction. I am on secondment at the University of Southampton, and I have the year chair at the University of Cyprus. But otherwise, once more.
So currently you are in Cyprus or in Southampton?
I am in Cyprus, yes.
Oh, so it's only half an hour flight from Haifa.
That's right. That's right. So today's presentation will have a unique format because I wanted to present a paper that relates very closely to previous papers in a research agenda. So I will try to present the totality of the research agenda today, so that you're familiar with it. I understand that I haven't presented it in this environment. And I will try to focus on the empirical results and how they tend to be consistent across environments and across experiments. And I will just note that for many of our environments, the theoretical prediction is extremely simple, which helps a lot, so that I will not focus that much on the theoretical analysis. So let me introduce a little bit the problem. We think that in our research team, apologies, which is many Greek people, Theodoros Alexandratos, Aristotelis Boukuras, Sotirios Georganas, myself, and Alina Velias on that third paper. Our research agenda, we think introduces a well-known in a novel way. So we think that we present a novel paradigm, which is identify the expert. So basically, this comic introduces the basic idea, which is, what do people believe regarding the expression of opinions among different peoples? Who do they think is right? Who do they think is wrong? Who do they think is an expert and who is not? So the research agenda that I will present today consists of 3 papers. And of course, my intention is to convey especially the third paper. And I will need really feedback from you regarding one particular aspect. How independent is 3 from the other 2 papers? So how can we really describe what exactly we're doing in paper 3 without somebody being 100% familiar with the previous 2? So that's really something that we're trying to gauge. Okay, so what is the problem of identifying the expert? Once upon a time, the knowledge was limited. It could be codified in one library. It was thought that people could possess knowledge of everything if they really wanted to devote their lives to it. But of course, as specialization increased, we now have the situation where we know how to do certain things, but we might be very bad in everything else. And importantly, we depend so much on appropriate selection of experts. How can we do that? Do we do that in a good way or a bad way? Unfortunately, in our research agenda, we're going to show that even in environments where there is an obvious rule to understand who is the expert and who is not, people fail badly in identifying the expert, and they would do better by choosing by pure chance. So that's kind of the big message. Okay, so who is the expert and who can tell? Let us introduce the problem a little bit with some definitions. The way that we view the expert is as somebody who has dedicated their lives to understand a topic deeply. How we think of the experts in particular is as an expert representative. So we are thinking implicitly of a long-run relationship between the agent who chooses the expert and the former. We are thinking, for example, one can fix ideas thinking in terms of politicians, accountants, doctors, and so on and so forth. So what is judicious choice of this kind of experts? So on the other hand, and this is important to know, we're going to juxtapose the expert with a populist. So we will be talking in this presentation in terms of a non-expert, just to make the terminology relatively consistent. But the non-expert that we have in mind is particularly a populist, somebody who has a particular strategy to tell people what they want to hear. Okay, so throughout, when we mean about non-expert, we mean somebody who tells people what they want to hear. This will become clear what we mean as we introduce the problem. So here is our main question. As the number of sources of information is growing, okay, and the challenge of identifying the quality of advisor becomes of paramount importance. And if we are in an environment with multiple advisors, very common, resembling an online environment, for example, social media, okay? And people have a voice, express different opinions on important matters, sometimes technical matters such as the economy. Are tariffs good? Are tariffs bad? And so on and so forth. So when everyone has a voice, who do people listen to? So will they listen to true experts, or will they be carried over to a choice of non-experts as long as they choose a populist strategy? What can be done about this? So let's introduce the environment, but before all, in such a project with so many Greeks, it's necessary to introduce a Greek saying. Why does this all matter? I think it's obvious, but most importantly, in terms of politics, τότε έφυτας πόλης απόλυσθε όταν μη δίνονται τους φαύλους από των σπουδαίων διακρίνην, which means that states fail when they cannot distinguish fools from serious men. It was already known from antiquity, but we have a problem, and maybe today one can say that this is particularly relevant. So basically, we're landing to Earth, and we speak about the particular focus of this agenda. So we don't go in the direction of a very abstract environment. We focus on applied economic policy issues. So this applying setting will become obvious, and how it is important, and our work differs from previous works. So what is important relative to other well-established and brilliant work on experts is that we abstract from every dimension except the stated opinion of experts, of the advisors, okay? So the only thing that differentiates the two candidates of who can be expert and who can be non-expert is only the opinions they state. We abstract from credentials and demonstrable skills. We don't have that. We don't have explicit competition between advisors. We don't deal with the problem of alignment of incentives, and we don't have the issue of a particular identity of the advisors or advisees playing a role. So again, in the simplest possible environment, one can think of it again in the setting of social media. Oftentimes, it's unclear really who is behind an account and who gains popularity in the social media. And of course, for simplicity, this really allows us to isolate our particular question. So we are going to the first two experimental designs that will allow us to introduce the third. So all the experiments in our first two papers have the same characteristics. There is an economic questionnaire with multiple choices. You will be familiar with this soon. In case you want to see more of it, maybe in the discussion, I have it in the appendix. Then okay, they answer the questionnaire, and after every question, they see the recommendations, the recommended answers by two advisors. They are informed that one of them is the expert and one of them is a non-expert. Okay, they know that the non-expert selects popular but often wrong answers. There's just one particular treatment in the first experiment where they don't know this modus operandi of the non-expert. In all others, they are informed that the non-expert selects what people are likely to answer. How do we define popular? On the basis of previous pilots with the same sample frame. I will explain this even further. And they know that the expert answers correctly with a high probability. In some designs with 100% probability, in others with 70%. But this is a common structure. Okay, then the main decision is this. On the basis of the advice for each question, which one do they choose to answer on their behalf? And implicitly, which one do they consider as the expert? This decision is incentivized. Okay, so participants know that there is only one correct answer for each question, that there is one expert, but they don't know who that person, individual is. Okay, they know the probability of a correct answer by an expert and non-expert. And based on this structure, let us describe our two first papers that consist of different treatments. In paper one, we conducted the experiments in the laboratory. Participants were students. There were 4 possible answers per question. And in addition to the structure I described, people answer the questionnaire. For each question, they see the advice, then they choose an expert. There was a session with learning where people received feedback on the correct answers, on each correct answer sequentially. Okay. Then we took this experiment, which was relatively complex, and we simplified it and got exact theoretical predictions and a very clear structure. We conducted the experiment again with an online population, representative of the general population across critical dimensions. We simplified the problem in having 2 possible answers per question. And again, the great advantage of this simplification was the clear prediction for optimal behavior that I will describe in a second. Okay. So the major question here is, again, across different environments, across different information conditions, across different subjects, who tends to be more popular, the expert or the populist? I have to note, when we say correct answers, our questionnaire consists of economic problems that are not purely mathematical problems. Okay, they require a level of economic understanding and intuition. How do we validate the correct answer? Well, in the same way that science validates answers using consensus of experts. So we have conducted a large structured pilot with academic economists across Europe, and whenever there is enough consensus for a particular answer greater than 70%, we consider this, we admit the question, and we consider this the most popular answer as the correct one. Okay. So let me introduce a little bit the questionnaire. I'm pretty sure you want to see it at this stage. People really are looking forward to see what we are talking about in terms of our questions. So this is a screenshot from experiment 2 with only 2 possible answers. And the problem for each question goes as follows. This particular question, in Richland, at first, there is no value-added tax on fruits. Okay, without that tax, the price of kilo is 100 pounds. The government is thinking of imposing a tax of 24% on all fruits. And here is the question: what will be the price of apples after the market adjusts to the tax? Okay, so it's likely that a non-expert, a non-economist, is likely to answer 124. But of course, we know that the true answer depends on the slope of demand and supply, and the correct answer is between 100 and 124. Okay, so I don't have time, so I'm not going to go in detail into the elicitation of beliefs here. So I'll keep the basic structure. So then,
can I ask a question about the procedure? It seems that the first answer is just more broader than the second. If the second is correct, the first is all. So every wise person should choose the first answer then.
yeah, absolutely, I wouldn't disagree. But the thing is that people, so that makes it even more remarkable that people give the naive answer of 124. So if there is this logical aspect that you're describing, that makes even more, it's even logically dominated, if you wish. So basically, naive participants answer B, which is the issue of interest for us. We haven't really thought of the exact point. I'll give it a thought to see whether there's something to it. But again, the main interest is that many people, the popular answer for laypersons is the second one. So it's even more remarkable as you're describing it. So after people are confronted with a question, they get the recommendations from the two advisors. So they know one advisor is denoted J, the other advisor is denoted M. We try this to be relatively neutral. Okay. Again, in terms of our particular objectives in the second study, we also give the model answer. We're not going to have time to go into the reason we're doing this. It's because of the theoretical relevance. So, okay, I hope the structure is relatively clear. People observe a questionnaire, they give their own personal answers, they receive advice by two advisors, and on the basis of this information alone and not anything else, they decide on who is the expert and who is the populist or the non-expert. Okay, let's keep in mind that there are only two possible cases. So if you didn't have any, if you didn't observe any advice, okay, you would be still getting it right by pure chance for the expert of 50%. Okay, let us keep this in mind. So across our several experiments in the first two papers, these are our main results, and then we will go into some detail presenting the main treatment effects. So first of all, across the board, the populist prevails. They are more popular than the expert, okay? And this is robust to several dimensions that I will just describe right now, okay? Secondly, adding information on how experts behave tends to reduce this a little bit, but of course, the dominance of the expert remains relatively strong. Again, particular information will go. So in other words, what this is saying is that in the very first design that we ran in experiment 1, where we just told them the accuracy of the two advisors, without telling them that the non-expert chooses according to the most popular answers, in a previous sample with a similar sample frame. Sorry, let me just be absolutely clear. So in all of our experiments, the answer of the non-expert, of the populist, comes from a, if you wish, an estimation of what the population is likely to answer, okay? And it comes from a previous sample of answers with the same sample frame. So when they don't even know that, then it's the most extreme case. The expert is only chosen 15% of the time. Okay, I do consider this environment relevant because, in fact, in real life, when we observe behavior in the social media, it's not like we really know what are the incentives and the modus operandi of the people who express opinions. Okay, so I do consider this relevant. For the taste of economists and especially theorists, we like to have stronger information. So for the remaining sessions, except this very benchmark one, subjects are informed of the modus operandi of the non-expert. Okay. In addition to that, okay, when we give information about their own performance, this goes one step further in reducing the dominance of the populist, of the non-expert, but not fully. So in other words, overconfidence might have explained what was happening before. I think that I am good in economics, so I'm going to choose the advisor with whom I agree more. Now, when I am informed before choosing advisor how well I did, this ought to reduce this potential mistake. Okay, and this is what we did in experiment 2, and we found that this reduced only in a limited sense the dominance of the non-expert. In addition, in a treatment in experiment 1, where we gave feedback on the correct answer, question by question, okay, this tended to improve things, okay, but after feedback on a great number of questions, still people failed to converge on the appropriate expert. Again, the data will just follow. Okay, finally, in a session where we considered the following: what happens if people are just invested in their own priors, okay, and they will not admit that they were wrong. So is there a way to undo of this ego involvement as a possible driver of the dominance of the populist? We have a session in treatment 2, in paper 2, and then this makes no difference. Still, the populist prevails. Overall, and this is the motivation for our paper 3, we find that there is a strong tendency to choose the advisor with whom we agree. And just anticipating the discussion, this is natural. Okay, when we have zero information, of course, we're going to go, we have our sample size is just one, our own opinion. So, of course, we're going to go with the one we agree. The problem is that this is not a general environment that people should apply this because of the way that the populist operates. Okay, the optimality of this heuristic is violated in our case, and it's very difficult for people to understand it. This is kind of the big insight, and we will get to this later on. So this is wrong to do in our environment, but people don't get this. So let's go to paper 1 and present the main results. We have 2 treatments. The red one goes when there is no information on how the populist operates. The blue one is when they know that the populist chooses, or the non-expert chooses the what people want to hear, if you wish. Okay, so the main results are in the shaded area. In the session, in the treatment with no information, people fail tragically to choose the expert. Okay, they just achieve the correct choice, something like 15%. In the session with greater information, in the treatment with greater information, they still fail to do this, but it goes close to 30%. If you want, just for your information of how well they do in the questionnaire, you have the answers, the percentage of correct answers from questions 1 to 10 before. Okay, this is not really what we are interested in, but this is the a general idea. And finally, from periods 13 on, people receive feedback period by period on what answer was correct. Okay, for each, in sequence for each question. This improves. So, and then people update their opinion on who they think is the expert. This improves things, but remarkably, after a large number of periods where they receive feedback, they still are not getting it right most of the time. So in some sense, people are still invested in what they believe. Keep in mind, we are allowed to give this insight, this feedback, because the expert is probabilistically correct. Okay, so one contradiction of a correct answer to the expert is not enough to rule out and to give a unique answer. Okay, and in the experiment 2, we're going to change it and we're going to make it even easier and simpler, but we're not going to have a session for learning for the same reason. Experiment 2. These are the main treatment effects. Okay, we have three sessions. Apologies. 3 treatments. In treatment 1, okay, they are not familiar with their own performance. Okay, so they just observe the questionnaire, they answer it, they observe the advice, and then after being reminded of what they answered and what each of the advisors suggested, they are asked to choose between the two. In treatment 2, before choosing, in addition, we told them, you answered correctly, let's say 7 out of 10 questions. Okay, this is the structure of answers by yourself, by J, and by M. Which one do you think is the expert? This improves performance, not surprisingly. Okay, it's marginally statistically significant, this improvement. And why would that be the case? Because it rules out a little bit the effect of overconfidence, of wrong beliefs, okay? Of believing that I am better than I truly am in economics, and therefore I exaggerate in using the heuristic. I go with the one that I agree more, okay? So in all 3 cases, we see once more that the populist dominates relatively strongly. Finally, in a treatment 3, where we did provide information on their own performance and everything was similar to treatment 2, and in addition, we used a manipulation to rule out ego involvement. Okay, we cannot go in that much detail, but we tried to get rid of the effect of being really egoistical and committed to an answer and not agreeing to choose somebody who disagree with me. Okay, in this case, this didn't have the anticipated result than we expected, and still the dominance of the populist was particularly pronounced. Okay, so we have just presented evidence across the board in several treatments with several manipulations for robustness checks that people fail in environments where the only information they have is the expressed opinions of people to identify a true expert, as long as the expert is confronted with somebody who has information, if you wish, about what people expect to hear and chooses accordingly. So, a summary of what we saw in our presentation of papers 1 and 2, people fail to identify the expert, even in case where no Bayesian reasoning is necessary. So I have to emphasize strongly now, because I will introduce paper 3, what is the optimal choice in our experiment 2. In our experiment 2, in our paper 2, unlike paper 1, the expert is always correct. Okay? And the populist is always correct 40% of the time. But of course, they don't know which answer. So there is a simple logical rule to understand who is the expert and who is the non-expert. Simply, you count the number of common answers with the one advisor and with the other advisor. And the advisor with whom, okay, you have as many common answers as your number of correct answers is the expert. Of course, this goes in the case where you know your own performance. So very remarkably, in our treatment 2 and our treatment 3 of experiment 2, and this really deserves more attention, and this is what we're doing in experiment 3. People, even in this case, where there is a simple logical rule, fail to identify the expert. Okay, where not truly Bayesian reasoning is necessary. What we see in our data, and thus motivates our experiment 3 to our paper 3 to a large degree, people systematically choose the advisor with whom they agree the most. Once more, overall, in general, this is a correct rule, but not in our environment. Feedback on how the non-expert operates, feedback on own performance, feedback on the correct answers, as we saw, improves performance generally, but not enough such that the non-expert still prevails. Once more, people would do better if they knew nothing and they were choosing purely by chance. And addressing Evo involvement does not bring an additional improvement. So, and let me just very shortly present you something. We even had an older version of ChatGPT give us their advice on what they thought is the correct answer. And if we go to the second underlined column, okay, you don't have to worry about any of these numbers. Very simply, for 9 out of the 10 questions, ChatGPT gives the answer of the populist. So there are, reasons for, possible reasons for that. Maybe in the discussion, we can go back to this. So we want to delve further into the issue of how participants decide, and in particular, to try to understand what is happening in treatments 2 and 3 of our paper 2. When there is the simple logical rule, okay, where people should be getting it right, but they don't. Can we delve further into understanding the degree to which this simple heuristic works, choosing the advisor with whom we agree the most, and the failure to get the accurate rule, okay, which is to choose the advisor with whom we have as many common answers as our number of correct answers, okay? So our motivation is that people's failure to do this simple thing might have important implications for democracy that really drives the dominance of the populist in the full information case where people know their own accuracy. Okay, so our objective is to understand the simple heuristic bias, and the bias of failing to understand the correct heuristic, the correct solution, and to study their determinants and robustness. And once more, I would really like your opinion into how we can really present paper 3 to stand on its own without full understanding of the research agenda. So what we're going to do is we're going to start from experiment 2, and we're going to really narrow down the structure of the problem. We're going to get rid of the actual questionnaire, and we're just going to go straight to the logical problem. At the same time, for reasons that will become evident, that we want to study the effect of demographics, okay, we are expanding the sample, employing 12,000 participants, representative across age and education in the UK. Okay, so here is how the experiment looks like in this third paper where things have been simplified fully. We have 2 information processing parameters that we vary. And then in the next page, I will just introduce the experimental screens. We are going to present the problem where you show them how many common answers they have, basically, with the one and the other advisor, either in table form, where they just observe question by question the answers and they have to calculate how many they have common. This will just become clear in a second, versus a description where they explicitly told how many they have common, okay? So there is a text format, which simplifies things, and a table format where they have to gauge the number of common answers. And secondly, the number of common answers with the 2 advisors. Why do we do that? Why? Because in experiment 2, what we couldn't do is to really examine how difficult the logical problem is depending on the common answers with the two advisors. In other words, there was a little bit of a confounding effect. If we wanted to see whether more educated, better people, better in quantitative skills or in economics, were better in understanding in solving the problem, we would not be able to do that. Why? Because these people tended to face a different problem from people who were not that good. Why? Because the former had a larger number of common answers with the expert. So there was correlation between the, if you wish, the ability of people and the easiness of the problem they faced. We are dealing with this in this experiment, and we make it endogenous how many are the common answers with the two advisors, and it allows us to examine the effect of the demographics on the logical problem. Okay. Finally, we had the number of correct answers and the number, the number of common answers with the expert by definition, and the number of common answers with the populist running from 1 to 10 versus 0 to 10. There are technical reasons for that I don't want to go into detail. So this is how, let me just show this and then I'll go back. This is how the two versions of the experiment work. Okay, abstracting from the questionnaire, simply going straight to the point regarding the logical problem. Okay, in a 10-question questionnaire, there were two possible answers, two advisors. One of the advisor gave the correct answer everywhere. The other advisor is a layperson who gave only 40% of answers correctly. Okay, this is a similar structure to our experiment, to our paper 2. Okay, then we gave them information. And the hypothetical person who answered the questionnaire had 4 common answers with advisor J and 10 common answers with advisor M. Okay, based on this information alone, which one of the two advisors is more likely to be the expert? So this is purely confronting people with a logical problem of realizing that the number of common answers with the expert must be the number of correct answers of the particular agent who participated in the questionnaire. But we thought of the problem significant enough as to narrow it down, consider different combinations of the common answers, and this is what we're doing here, and examining the role of demographics and the role of presentation of the problem, because the alternative presentation is this. They get the same information, okay? One is the expert, 100% accurate. The other is the non-expert, 40% of the case is accurate. We tell them the number of correct answers of Jim, the participant, and then they're asked to gauge, to estimate themselves how many are the common answers, okay? But by just seeing the answers of Jim, the participant, and compare it to the answer of the two advisors, okay? So this, in some sense, is a more natural and ecologically valid environment, because actually you receive feedback, problem by problem, about whether you agree with a particular influencer or person who expresses an opinion, okay? So, and also we want to consider how this simplification of the problem by offering a summary, how it improves, if you wish, the performance. And then they are asked about whether they think the expert is advisor J, advisor M. Both are equally likely on whether there is not enough information, okay? So we wanted to make things a little bit more challenging in this case, okay? And to if you wish, to provide more detailed and nuanced information, so we increased the possible choices to 4. Our hypothesis in paper 3 were the following. Once more, less than half of participants successfully identified the expert. This comes, if you wish, straight from what we observed in experiment 1 and 2. Secondly, for the reasons we explained, we expect that the percentage of participants who correctly identify the expert in the table treatment, where they have to do some cognitively demanding work to find out how many are the common answers, the percentage of accurate choice is going to be lower than the text treatments where the decision is simpler. And finally, and the reason we varied systematically the number of correct answers in a totality of 70 specifications that I will present in a second, we expect basically that whenever the two advisors differ a lot in their number of correct answers, in their number of common answers with a participant, the decision becomes easier and the percentage who correctly identify the expert improves. Okay, so when the number of common answers is relatively close to each other, it's more difficult to figure out the problem. Okay, once more, this shouldn't be relevant if people were perfectly capable of just figuring out the simple logical answer. Okay, but if people are kind of using a little bit of a more intuitive process, okay, then the degree of distance should matter. So let me go now before to give you the last
Zacharias, you
information.
have another 5 minutes or so. If you can finish 5 minutes, it would be good.
Yeah. So we have 34 sub-treatments on the basis of possible specification of relevant parameters. How many are the common answers with the two participants? Okay, and finally we had two high investment incentive treatments where people were entering a lottery for winning 50 euros. And here are the results. The main treatment effect in our paper 3 is that once more people fail to find the advisor 2/3 of the time. These are the results across the board. And this is despite the fact that there is a simple logical solutions to solve the problem. Okay? Yes, advisor M, who is the true expert, apologies, let's remember that always advisor M is the expert here, is doing better than advisor J, but often people are confused and they're not able to really clearly distinguish this pattern. Okay, so we can take some specific examples. For instance, when there are two answers in common with the non-expert and 8 answers in common with the expert, a very favorable case that people should figure out who the expert is. Only 42% approximately select the expert, 18% choose the populist, and several others say it's equally likely. Okay, so these are a little bit of more detailed presentation. I think I'm going to skip it because it's relatively demanding to understand what's really going on here. Let me just go straight to the comparison between table and text treatments. Let us just go to the last 3 columns. Okay, the third to last column just tells us the fraction of correct answers of finding the expert in cases where the distance between the common answers of the participant with the one and the other expert is less than 3. So correct answers when there is little difference in common answers. And the next column, the second to last, tells us the accuracy when there's a large difference in common answers. Okay, and we find a statistically significant result which tells us that it matters, this distance matters. Finally, we examined the impact of demographics. So this is descriptively, okay, income has a positive effect, education has a positive effect, and age, roughly speaking, has a negative effect on finding the expert. Okay, and we corroborate this evidence, of course, with regression information. These are our variables. We don't have time to go through them in detail, but just summarizing, we find that education is a variable that, after correcting for all variables, still has a positive effect on the probability of finding the expert. These are logit regressions. And interestingly, we find a large gender effect where females are much more likely to fail to identify the true advisor. And in the first variables, we also corroborate the importance of the distance between how many common answers there are. So, concluding, and I hope I haven't gone much more than I should in terms of time,
That's
across a range of situations and parameters, we consistently find that people fail to find the true expert in this environment. Presentation format between table and description does not make a difference. Demographics matter. This is a positive message for, if you wish, for democracy a little bit, that among the people with high education, it seems that their performance is better. Okay, this message can be positive or negative depending on how you interpret it. Okay, one interpretation of that is that high human capital subjects have more of a chance to identify the counterintuitive, correct process of finding the answer relative to the others. So I will conclude here. Our main challenge, of course, apart from making sure that what we did was sound and accurate, is to really place once more our paper 3 in terms of the literature without making it dependent on understanding our full agenda. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Zacharias. This was really yeah, maybe I will take the first. This will not be polite, but I will nevertheless take the first question, and then people can vote for the second. I think that your results are amazing. This is one of the most important open question of our time. Why populists are so successful, and you have this really strong finding that surprised me. So, where did you publish the first 2 papers? I expected to see them in Science. Where did you publish them?
Our second paper is revise and resubmit. We think it's basically soon forthcoming at American Economic Journal Micro. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to comment very much on the process regarding
Yeah. No, because one reason might be that you try to send it to economic journal. In theory, you could send something like that, I think, to Science. I don't know if you try something like Science, because economists are, they really give you a hard time with their, in many respects. This is important finding, not necessarily related to economic theory. It's
The
really
way-
important finding. I think, to me, it is important.
No, we thought
So if you would ask me for what to do with the third paper, if I were you, I would present a summary of the first 2 papers and try to send it to a general, unless you already tried general models like a paper like Science or Nature, or at least Nature Human Behavior. I think this is really important stuff. What's more important nowadays than populism? And these results are really very strong. So instead of trying to write it to economists who don't want to read the previous paper, I would present summary of the main results of the previous paper, and then because I don't think the previous paper got enough attention.
Thank you so much on this point regarding this strategy. That's definitely something that we'll consider very carefully. As I was telling you, the the difficulty is to really convince if the paper 3 is isolated of the importance of this part getting particularly right this rule. So that's why paper 2 is so important in really understanding the significance of the particular problem. So thank you so much, Ada, for this.
No, but I think that maybe paper series should be a summary because the results are so important, going to be buried in some economic journal. To have some summary of your main results and then addition, maybe you don't have to assume that people understand. Just your main story is so simple. You can summarize it very clearly without all the details, just the numerical examples. This is what and you could also send it to journals like, there are also journals in psychology that likes finding of that sort. So the theory here is, is less important. The finding is really important, and then future research should try to understand, the theoretical implication. But the findings are really amazing by themselves. Other questions, Ori?
Yeah. Thanks, Zacharias. So let me clarify something about the difference between the first papers and the third paper. So it was a different paradigm, right? So in the third paper, it felt more like it's a logical question. It's not taking into account. So it's not taking an advice. Whose advice would you take? It's answer this question in logic. And when you ask people questions in logic, it makes sense that education matters very much, I think, according to your results, right? I wonder if you think that education also would matter, or do you have results of education mattering in the taking advice, explicit advice from one of the two advisors in the first experiment?
As I was trying to explain, the results from our paper 2, which paper 3 tries to follow, do not allow us to examine the effect of education. The reason is the following: that more educated people, and we tend to confirm this with our data, more educated people are likely to have more common answers with the expert. That renders the problem that they have to solve, if you want it in terms of structure of paper 3 to make it easier, to pinpoint the logic, they have an easier problem to solve than those that don't have such a problem. Imagine, for instance, that there is a very smart person, okay, that has 8 common questions with one participant versus 2 common questions with the other participant, with the other advisor. Apologies. Even if that person uses the what we call the simple heuristic of going with the advisor with whom they agree, they would get it spot on. In other words, they won't have to do the difficult exercise of going against the simple heuristic.
But no one is an expert in all subjects, right? So maybe the first experiments, the data you have from the first experiments are not suitable to test this question, but I still think there's a huge difference between taking advice from someone and answering a question in logic. It's not the same paradigm. I don't think necessarily that the results from the third experiment speak very much to what how education matters in taking advice. So you can maybe change the subject matter and ask and do a lot of different subject matters. So more educated people might be better at economics. I don't know, economics questions or math-like questions, but you can ask them about sports. You can ask them about many other things that they have no relative advantage in. And my guess is that then education would not matter. People will just follow who they think is better.
there is relevant psychological evidence, I don't remember of the details, that kind of shows that oftentimes critical skills unfortunately don't operate as we expect them to. That if you are very good in one domain, that means that you have good critical skills that translate to another domain. So, or your point is, agrees, I think, with some evidence from psychology. And we have received a lot of feedback throughout this research agenda on the importance of going to other domains, such as medicine. But I have to emphasize the following. We particularly think that we would find such a result because there are some domains where people have strong opinions that are wrong. And we think economics is like that. There's a huge literature that we summarize in our paper too. Since the late 19th century, you will be surprised, that documents how lay people disagree with experts, with economists in several economics domains. Maybe today, the period makes it not so surprising that many people would dispute, established knowledge in economics. I think tariffs is a major example. So we think that these people will face particular problems, and the populists are going to be particularly strong in domains where they're seemingly correct, where people could be having strong priors but wrong answers. So in other words, maybe it has a bite in some, we think in some of the epidemiology, we have seen some examples with COVID. For instance, maybe in physics, we don't see that, although still people have strong views about flat Earth and, going to space and so on and so forth. So as long as this exists, we believe that our finding is particularly relevant. Finally, Ori, I disagree a little bit that paper 2 does not speak, paper 3 does not speak to paper 2, because I think that one of the most remarkable aspects of paper 2 is the failure of people to identify the expert despite the simple logical solutions. So going a little bit deeper in why and what characteristics may make people fail the logical process might be important.
Yeah, we have time for one more question before we go to the informal part. Actually, only for half a question. Anyone has an important question? If not, we will move to the informal part where